I wanted to do a little video series for realtors about the standards of practice for home inspectors, and I want to keep it. I want to keep the videos kind of brief, but maybe they'll be about 5 minutes long, and I want to keep them somewhat interesting to specifics of the standards of practice. So, a standards of practice for a home inspector is just what are we supposed to inspect and what don't we need to inspect. There are guidelines for that. And your inspector is supposed to be doing these things, and they also don't have to do all this other stuff that people think that we're going to do. And I think as realtors, it's important that you know what some of those things the inspectors should be doing are and what they don't have to do as well. I think you guys have the gist of that stuff, but I wanted to go over a couple of things. Let's start with what a home inspection is, and I'll keep this super short, but a home inspection is a visual evaluation of the property at the time of the inspection. So if we can see it and it's there when we're there, then we report on it. If we can't see it, we don't report on it. If it's not there when we're there, we don't report on it. So let's say we take a look at a property and we say, whatever, the place looks great. No roof leaks at the time of the inspection. We're not even going to put that in the report. We're just not going to put in the report that there's a roof leak, right? But let's say what I mean by that is the home inspector is not going to say, the roof's good, it can't leak. That's just a liability problem. What they're going to say is just nothing about the roof because they didn't find an active leak at the time of the inspection. So let's say they are inspecting the house and the weather conditions are dry and they inspect the house and there's no roof leaks. And then the next day it rains and the roof pours water out of the ceiling. The home inspector is going to say, well, it wasn't there when I was there. Right? And that's correct. That's true. So you can hate that as much as you want, but it's a fact. If there's no water, then they can't find water. Right? So if we have a month of dryness and then they inspect the house and then it rains the next day and the roof leaks, well, that sucks. But that's not the home inspector's fault. And they're going to point to the standards of practice and say, well, yeah, this isn't my problem. So it's an important thing for everyone to keep in mind out there. It's a visual inspection at the time of the inspection. Can't predict the future. There are a bunch of limitations that come along with the home inspection. And that's because it's a visual inspection at the time of the inspection, is weather dependent, etc. So let's go over some of those things. An inspection is not technically exhaustive. So we don't need to determine the cause of problems. We're not required to do that. So we test a furnace and the furnace doesn't work. We just say, the furnace doesn't work. We put that in the report. That's it. We're done. Move on to other things. We start inspecting something else, right? We don't go to the furnace and start taking it apart and start trying to figure out why it doesn't work. And people always want us to do those things, especially buyers, right? Some buyers go a lot further than others. Some buyers go, okay, the furnace doesn't work. I guess I'll get a furnace guy to fix it. Other buyers, especially maybe like the buyer's dad, right? They'll spend freaking 45 minutes down there trying to figure out why the furnace doesn't work. Don't do that. It's not your furnace. Don't touch it. And you probably aren't going to figure it out. And even if you figure it out, you can't fix it because you don't have any parts or tools with you. So just don't bother, right? Just don't do those things. It's like a pet peeve of mine when I'm doing an inspection and I don't know, I turn on the fireplace. The fireplace is a common one, right? Turn it on, it doesn't work. Okay, go and reset the pilot light and start it over and give it 10 minutes and whatever. Come back, doesn't turn on. Yes, a lot of times for sure, the homeowner comes home, they got a message from their realtor saying the fireplace doesn't work, and they go and they hit the switch and they go, yeah, it does. And it just kicks on, right? That happens for sure. But as a home inspector, I don't know, I tried it a couple times, didn't work, I'm putting it in the report. You get it figured out. Do some home inspectors go a little further with those things and try and figure it out and stuff like that? Yeah, sure. And usually it's going along with their knowledge base, right? So if you have a home inspector who's an electrician and there's an electrical issue, they'll probably be trying to diagnose what's going on with it. Do I recommend they do that? No, mainly for this reason, which is just, yeah, sure, you could like misdiagnose the problem. That's not the reason why I don't think you should do it. I don't think you should do it because if you diagnose that problem, technically, legally, you're now supposed to be diagnosing all the problems. Are you diagnosing all of the problems? No. So if you diagnose that electrical problem and then there's also like a basement leak and you go, well, I don't know, it's leaking. You have to call in an expert and they have to tell you like how much leaking there is and how much it's going to cost, and I have no idea. A lawyer is going to say, well, you evaluated that. Why didn't you evaluate this? What are you going to say? Well, but I used to be an electrician, so I have specific knowledge of that. Does the client know that? Did you tell them that? Did you put that in writing anywhere? Did you explain that to them in writing? Because the client can just say, well, he never told me that. So be careful with that stuff. Just saying, you can get yourself in trouble diagnosing problems. And a big part of the reason why home inspectors aren't required to diagnose the problems is we don't know. We don't know what the answer is, right? Diagnosing things, it requires somebody who, for example, with a furnace, that's all they do is they fix furnaces and they know the ins and outs of it and they know all the different brands and they know all the different parts and they have the tools to diagnose it. We don't. So we don't even try. We just go, furnace doesn't work. An inspection will not identify concealed or latent defects. So a lot of people know what a latent defect is, but it's just a problem with the property that can't be discovered under a regular, thorough home inspection. So you go do a thorough home inspection and everything looks good, and you find out 2 months later that the window leaks. But there were no signs of it, there was no indications of it, the flashing was outside was done properly, it just leaks. That's life, right? A contractor comes out and goes, well, it looks good. What's the problem? Well, the window leaks. Really? Then they start ripping it apart, and they rip it apart, and then they find the problem areas underneath. Now, that contractor is going to throw the home inspector under the bus and say, well, they should have told you all of these things because blah, blah, blah. Well, in reality, in terms of the home inspection, all that stuff was concealed and you can't see through walls. So you're not going to find some of that stuff. How much of that, how many latent defects are there in your average house? None. It's rare, right? Usually there's some sort of indication that there's a problem because the cosmetic finishes of the house are not meant to withstand damage, right? I mean, they're basically fragile and they're easily destroyed by water, etc. So if there's a leak, usually there's some indication of that. Not always, but a lot of times defects are visible. But it could be a latent defect like we talked about with the roof, where the roof obviously doesn't leak when it's dry out, but it's still leaking, right? It's still like waiting to leak. And then, or it even has leaked in the past, but maybe not very much, not enough to cause a bunch of water damage, but it is leaking. And then you inspect it when it's dry, and then it rains later on, and now it's like leaking more. Yep, that kind of thing can happen. So this isn't like something that's the home inspector's fault. This is a limitation of doing the home inspection. we're at the home for a short period of time under certain conditions, and those conditions change over time. An inspector will not deal with aesthetic concerns or what could be deemed matters of taste, cosmetic defects, etc. Yeah, absolutely. That's cosmetic. Now, how far do you go with cosmetic? What is cosmetic? In my personal opinion, something like a fence is cosmetic. I mean, you can see it as a buyer with your own eyes. Do you like that fence? I don't know, right? Oh, it's leaning a little bit. Yep. Would you like to spend thousands of dollars fixing it? I don't know. You can figure that out for yourself, right? I think something like that is like, even getting into something like a fence or whatever, that's cosmetic. A deck, less cosmetic because somebody could get hurt, it could fall apart, that kind of thing. Scratches on doors, holes in walls, that kind of stuff. It's just not part of the inspection. We're just not going to comment on it. It's not going to be in the report. If I go in a bedroom and then I close the door and I see at the back of the door somebody punched it, yeah, I'll probably say something to the buyer. Hey, by the way, there's a hole in the back of that door, because they probably didn't see that, right? When they viewed the house, they didn't go around like looking at all the doors. So I might mention that to them, but I'm not putting it in the report. People will ask me to put it in the report all the time. If they ask me to put it in the report, I might, and I might not. There is some liability concern with that as well, right? Well, you noted this cosmetic defect. Why didn't you note all of them? Sounds dumb, right? I agree. But it's the reality of doing home inspections. An inspector will not determine the suitability of the property for any use. This is a really interesting one, right? What are your plans with the house? Well, I did an inspection the other day. Guy wants to turn it into a daycare, right? And he's like, well, what do you think? Like, what do you think the chances are I could, what needs to be done to turn this into a daycare? Buddy, I have no idea whatsoever. Like, zero idea what you need to do to turn this into a daycare. Like, that's something you need to look up. I don't know. Probably you need to do a lot of things, I would guess. But, we don't need to determine that. I don't need to figure out what your plans are and then determine if the house will fit those needs. I don't need to do it. Okay? Future market value or marketability of the home. Now, that's an interesting one because obviously market value, home inspectors shouldn't even be commenting on at all in any way, shape, or form. We should completely try and stay out of that realm entirely. That's what you got a realtor for. But marketability, right? Marketability, that's an interesting one. That's like, you have a wood foundation. The home has a wood foundation. I've done many inspections where the house has a wood foundation and the buyer did not know that. They did not know that. They thought the foundation was made of concrete. And I explained the pros and cons of a wood foundation and of concrete foundations. I explained it to them. But then I'll tell them, look, I don't have any idea what it does to the value of the house. I don't have any idea about that sort of thing. You should talk to your realtor about this. But probably there's a stigma that comes with the wood foundation, right? Buyers that you're going to try and resell this to, right? They're going to come in and they're going to see wood foundation on the listing and they might not even come and look at the house. They might just be like, I'm not even halfway interested in that place now, just because of that. They wouldn't know unless you told them, but you have to tell them. And then, they just don't even look at the property. So you lose a bunch of buyers. And then also people come and look at the house and they realize it's wood foundation and maybe they look it up online and they go, I don't want to deal with it. and you just lose a bunch of those people. So there's a stigma, and that stigma costs money, right? That's going to relate to money. So I have told people before, hey, it's a wood foundation. There's a stigma that goes along with that. When you go to resell the house someday, even though you think, hey, the wood foundation is great, I love it, whatever. That's cool. Not everyone's going to think that. Just a heads up, right? But we're not required to say that to people. And you should be very careful about which things you would say that about. To me, I think wood foundations is one of those things, but I'm sure there's home inspectors out there who say that about every part of the house. And that's not something you have to do, and you shouldn't do it. You're running a business, and that's a really dumb move. An inspector does not determine the insurability of the property. Can you get insurance on this place? How much is the insurance going to be? Anything related to insurance, we don't have to inspect, okay? We don't know the answers to it. We're not insurance brokers. Ask your insurance broker. End of story there. Now, I do have a section in my report at the end that says common insurance questions. Because when home buyers call their insurance provider, the insurance provider is going to ask them a series of questions. How old's the hot water tank? How old do you think the roof is? Does the place have a back water valve? Does it have a sump pump? And people don't want to, and they don't read the report, and they don't want to look through the report and try and figure that stuff out. So I just make a short list of those items that I saw that quite often get asked by insurance providers. And I mean, does that open me up to some liability insurance wise? Maybe, but I'll deal with that if it happens, because I think it provides a really good service to the buyer just on those specific items that I can just say whether or not you have one. I don't say anything about if it benefits them or not. Like poly B, for example, right? What if the house has poly B? Well, okay, so it has poly B. Now what? Well, some insurance companies may deny you insurance. Other insurance companies might charge you more money. I have no idea. You should go find out about that. That's part of the problem with poly B. Part of the problem with poly B is it leaks. But the other big part of the problem is, can you get insurance? How much does it cost? That's the immediate problem with poly B. So, we're not required to determine that. I don't know if you can get insurance on this place. Inspection does not determine the advisability or inadvisability of the purchase of the inspected property. That's a really long-winded way of saying I don't have to tell you whether or not to buy the house. I, as a home inspector, am not required to tell you whether or not to buy the house. And, people used to ask this a lot more 10 years ago than they do now. Although people still ask it now, is you get to the end of the inspection and go, would you buy this house? I don't have to answer that. I'm not going to answer that. You have to make the decision whether you're buying the house or not, Mr. Client or Mrs. Client, right? Or both. One person wants to buy it, the other doesn't, whatever. I don't want to get involved in that stuff, right? I don't know. Don't know. I don't have to tell you that. That is a limitation of the home inspection. And it would be well served for everybody in the transaction to know that that's a limitation. Maybe even mention to your client, hey, by the way, we're going to do the home inspection tomorrow. At the end, don't ask the home inspector if they'd buy the house, so they're not going to tell you. It's just, you're going to make yourself look dumb. A home inspector does not determine the life expectancy of the property or any component or system therein. Ooh. Well, do they or don't they, though? That's a question, because that's a limitation of the inspection. I don't have to determine how long anything is going to last in here. Good luck with that, doing a realistic, real-life home inspection. The furnace is 30 years old, Mr. Customer. Well, what does that mean? Right? So it's 30 years old. Okay, so that's good or bad? I don't know. Don't they last like 60 years? Oh, I don't know. I don't have to tell you. Yeah, good luck with that one. I'd say that I have different areas of the home where I will provide different information on this. So, a furnace or a hot water tank, I tell people this is like a little spiel I give them, right? I inspect the furnace and the hot water tank and I tell them the life expectancies, the typical life expectancies. I tell them the actual age of those devices and I tell them so then they know like where that falls in that lifespan and then I tell them what that means as well. So, hot water tank lasts 8 to 12 years. Around the 10-year mark, it's very likely they pop. Maybe it'll last a little longer than that. If it lives to be 14 or 15 years old, you should just buy a new one automatically because it's probably going to leak or not make hot water one day really soon. If I see one that's 20 years old, I go, this one's lived well beyond its lifespan. He's super lucky it's still even working. You just got to buy a new one yesterday. But then what I do is I'll inspect the furnace and hot water tank, and then I'll wait until I get to like the laundry or the dishwasher or something like that. And then I'll have another conversation with them where I'll explain the limitations of inspecting those appliances. And I'll say, hey, when it comes to inspecting a furnace or a hot water tank, I can tell you roughly how long they last and where they are in that life cycle and how likely they are to fail based on that. When it comes to something like a dishwasher, I don't know. I can't tell you how long it'll last. Some of them last for 2 years and some of them last for 40 years. And I just don't know. And I don't know how old this one is and I'm not going to look it up. And because it would just take a long time because there's all these different appliances and stuff, right? And also they're basically not even fixable these days, right? I mean, if you had to fix your dishwasher, you're just buying a new one. If you had to fix your microwave, 100% for sure, you just buy a new one. A couple $100. So that's the little spiel I give them. And then I talk about the limitations of inspecting like kitchen appliances and how I'm just doing a limited inspection there. But we're not required technically to talk about the age or the lifespan of any component in the house. And that's in there primarily because of kitchen appliances, yes. And it's primarily in there because of like structural components as well. Like how long does poly V last? Nobody knows. How long does PEX last? Really, nobody knows. Supposedly, it's going to last longer than poly B. So far, it's doing good. Yeah, great. Maybe we'll find out when PEX gets to be 30 years old. It just starts failing like crazy. I don't know. We don't know yet. So we don't have to determine that. How long is a concrete foundation good for? Don't know, right? So we're not required to determine the life expectancy of any system. An inspection does not include items not permanently installed. So this one maybe is more obvious, but you know, there is a little bit of a gray area. But if it's not bolted down, we don't have to look at it. Now, a stove's not bolted down. And technically speaking, we don't have to inspect it, but guess what? You're going to end up inspecting it because you inspected the dishwasher and the dishwasher is bolted down. The standards of practice applies to properties with 4 or fewer residential units and their attached garages and carports. Okay, so we're talking about residential buildings here for this standards of practice. Then there's commercial inspections, which is different. More exclusions. And we got about 20 more to go here. So I'm going to make a different video about those ones. But these are some of the main ones I've gone over here. Visual inspection at the time of the inspection, latent defects. We don't have to advise on the lifespan of things. The suitability of the property for other uses, insurance. There's a lot of limitations to the inspection. So you get the idea. Guess what? There's pages and pages and pages of this standards of practice. So I'm going to make several videos. I'll go over it with you. But yeah, the home inspection is a very limited thing. And people hire a home inspector and they think like, I'm going to get all the info here. You're going to get as much info as that person can provide you with. Yeah. But they can't provide you with all the info because they can't see it. They're not required to report on it. They're not required to figure out why that thing is broken, etc., etc. Lots of limitations, guys, and thanks for watching the video, and hopefully you learned something there, and hopefully you'll watch the other videos and learn about all the other exclusions for home inspectors.